How about now? Is that better? Okay, sorry. I know the theme of the whole conference is learning from the past, looking to the future. We have a great set of speakers this morning who are really going to fulfill that bill. First, starting with Kate Ryan from the Colorado Water Trust. And she's here to talk about infrastructure. How do we look at existing stuff? How do we remodel it for the 21st century? All the stuff you all are engaged with. So, without further ado, Kate.
Thank you. That's the nicest conference step up ever. Any rate, I'm Kate Ryan. I'm Senior Staff Attorney and Director of Programs with the Colorado Water Trust. I'm so glad we're all here together. What I'm going to discuss is something that I've been thinking about for a while as a water professional. I love being a water professional. I live in Boulder. Water Trust is based in Denver, but we get to work all over the state on projects. And it's so wonderful for me to get to know our state, including its people, its communities, and the water, and where it goes. And so I'm going to tell you just a little bit of background about the Water Trust and get into some of these concepts that I've been thinking about for a while as a water professional. The Water Trust, we've been around since 2001. We work on acquisitions of water rights. We work on leases, permanent acquisitions. We partner with SWCA's Streamflow program, but basically we're trying to work within Colorado's system of prior appropriation to restore stream flows to streams and rivers. And one thing I do want to emphasize at the outset of my talk, I'm going to be talking about Colorado water infrastructure, things like reservoirs. But the Water Trust is not an advocacy organization. We like to call ourselves a do tank, not a think tank. We don't advocate for reservoirs. We don't advocate against reservoirs. We really don't take any position on projects that other water users are engaging in. What we try to do is use the system that we have, whether it's prior appropriation system of water rights established over the last century, or whether it's using reservoirs that were built in the last half century. We try to work within that system to do what we can to restore flows to rivers in need. So one day I was up with my family hiking in the Indian Peaks Wilderness, and we were at Moffett Tunnel, which is kind of an amazing spot, and Noah and Maya are going to talk a little bit more about that area later in this session, but we were talking about the rivers up there, because it's this wild place, right? You drive up to Moffett Tunnel outside of Nederland, and there's a train coming out of a tunnel from the Continental Divide. There's water coming across the Continental Divide. And you're also at the entrance to a wilderness area. And it is beautiful. And so there are all these contradicting things that you can see. And the rivers are something that don't really tell their story of what's going on if you just look at them. When you look at the rivers up at Moffett Tunnel, they're beautiful. They really are beautiful. And at the same time, we were talking about as a family how it's not a purely wilderness system. It's not a purely natural system. All this water that's in the rivers up there is being delivered to somebody. It's being spoken for by a municipality, by an irrigator, by somebody. And so we were talking about that system. It looks wild, and it is wild. It's supporting wildlife. It's supporting fish, but it's also what we called fully plumbed. And this is a graphic. It's called a straight line diagram showing an area. This one's on the Poudre River in northern Colorado, and it just shows you how much is going on in a river. There's diversions all over the place, and there's water coming back. And this picture is a fully plumbed river. All the water is spoken for. It's all appropriated. And this is that same river, and it's beautiful. It's really wonderful. And so the question I ask myself sometimes as a water professional, especially as somebody who works in streamflow restoration, is it okay? Is it natural? Is it good? Is it sustaining Colorado? What do we have going on here? And I think about that quite a lot. And I think something interesting to think about is that history brought us here, right? So Colorado statehood, 1876. Prior to that, people were using water in our rivers. Native Americans were diverting water for irrigation. There were acequias in southern Colorado. There's a lot been going on. But things really got extra busy in the mid-1870s, right? We have miners coming and taking water and moving it a long way out of our rivers. And by the 1900s, a lot of our rivers were fully appropriated. We had this enshrined in our Constitution as a prior appropriation system, and there were conflicts on our rivers, but people were going to water court and they were getting their water rights described in decrees, and they were getting legally enforceable claims to use water. Fast forward 70 years to 1960s, 1970s in the environmental movement, and that is when our state began to recognize rights to use water for the beneficial use of in-stream flow by the Colorado Water Conservation Board. So that's the first time we really had protection of water to be used in rivers, but it's not the first time in our history where Coloradans were looking out for our streams and rivers. I'd say prior to 1973, a lot of water users, maybe not everybody, but people were well aware of the complexities of their water use and the way it benefited streams and rivers. The Rio Grande Basin, I think, is an amazing example of this happening. I used to be in private practice, and I worked with a bunch of clients in the San Luis Valley. San Luis Valley is a place that's been appropriated since the late 1800s. And yet, even though all the waters in those streams are spoken for, it's the home to migratory bird species, to sandhill cranes. A lot of those cranes come through our state and they land on irrigated fields. And so it may be over-appropriated, but that doesn't mean there's no water for the environment. It's really complex, and it's an interesting interconnection between humans and ecosystems. All right, so this. I've never shown this slide before. Does anybody know what this is? It is a stuffed animal. Do you know what animal it is? It's a beaver. So that's a Brewerly beaver. I went to an all-girls school, and our mascot was the Brewerly beaver. So this is a conversation perhaps for another day, but the best mascot. I still have my Brewerly beaver right here. And so, by truth and toil united was our slogan. And beavers, you all know here, I'm not a wildlife ecologist, and I know there's somebody speaking at this conference about beavers, but beavers work really hard, and they do a lot of good things for our streams and rivers. We don't have as many beavers as we did prior to the mid-1800s, when we had a lot of fur trappers as well. But we do have agriculture, and agriculture in some ways serves similar purposes to what beavers do. I'm not going to say it's exactly the same. It's not a one-for-one. It's just different, and it's just complex. But it's just interesting and important to think about flood irrigation. It does slow down our rivers. It does disperse some water on the land. And flood irrigation does result in the maintenance of late season return flows, keeping our streams and rivers running later into the season. So I don't know that this would be beaver approved, but it is something to think about, and it is an example of humans living in harmony to some degree with the environment. I'm going to talk about a couple of water trust projects that we have that rely on infrastructure. Now moving away from irrigation and diversions to discussion of how we're using reservoirs that were built in the previous century, in the 1900s. So 2 projects, one on the Yampa and one on the Colorado River. As background for these projects, over the last few years, the Colorado Water Trust, we work on acquisitions of water rights. We've worked on acquisitions of a lot of direct flow water rights, whether it's leases or permanent acquisitions. But over time, we've tried to look for ways to work on some bigger rivers. And one of the ways we've done this is working with water storage. So in Colorado, our hydrograph, of course, we tend to have lower flowing rivers in the winters when it's snowing, and snow is building up that storage that will melt in the spring. And then over the summer, if we're lucky, we get a monsoon like we did this year, and some peaks boosting flows in the summer. That supply provision does not necessarily match up with demand that takes water out of rivers. And it doesn't always match up, especially during a drier year when our hydrograph is going to be moved down a little bit in terms of volume. And so one thing that we've all been cognizant over the years is that there are certain times of the year that we're taking water out of rivers. That doesn't match up when rivers need it necessarily. So perhaps in February on the Cache la Poudre River, we are diverting water to reservoirs. and that is taking more water out of the river than is really required to keep it flowing healthfully in the river. Or in the summertime, perhaps we're taking water out for irrigation after peak flows in the spring, and that causes a hole in the river when the ecosystems need it. So what we're doing with our reservoir release program on the 15-mile reach and on the Yampa is to supplement supply when the river does need it. So we are working with water that's stored upstream in reservoirs. We can monitor stream conditions and then release the water to the rivers when it is needed most. And like the irrigation example, I want to say this isn't all, there's a lot of shades of gray here, right? It's not all perfect when it comes to ecosystem restoration. This is really a retiming of water use. We are going to have potentially some negative impacts on peak flows, but maybe we're smoothing things out and causing a better outcome for the rivers overall. It's a complicated question, but we're trying to do our best. And so on the Yampa River, what we've done is to boost flows. And the Colorado Water Trust releases from 2022 are shown in red for August through September. What the river would look like otherwise is shown in blue. And you can see that these releases for environmental purposes have a major impact on the river. We are releasing water that accounts for about half of the river up near Stagecoach Reservoir, and over half of the river during certain times of the year down near the city of Steamboat. And what this does is it keeps flows in some years at the levels the SWCA has determined to be appropriate for its in-stream flow reaches, and it also cools the river so that down near the city of Steamboat Springs, we're able to help the river stay cool enough to meet temperature standards where their wastewater treatment plant has an outfall, and that also helps to keep fishing and recreation open for longer during the year. We're always trying to tailor this. We're always trying to adapt to new conditions to try to make sure that these releases, since we're able to release from a structure, try to make it just enough and not too much, right? We don't want to impact that hydrograph negatively. What we want to do is make a difference for the river as much as we can. Another project we have is on the 15-mile reach of the Colorado River. And this is a project in which we work not only with a reservoir currently, but also with a hydropower facility. So the Colorado Water Trust partnered with Grand Valley Water Users Association and Orchard Mesa Irrigation District, which down near that red section on the Colorado River, they operate a hydroelectric facility. So we locate water that is decreed for industrial purposes and deliver it to that hydroelectric facility. That hydroelectric facility happens to return water to the 15-mile reach of the Colorado River where endangered fish live. And so we can boost flows that way. And we recently have been purchasing water out of Root Eye Reservoir in the magenta, teeny tiny, sorry about that. But we've been purchasing water from Root Eye Reservoir and delivering that to the 15-mile reach. And we are very strategic. We don't want to impact the river in negative ways. So we coordinate with all the water users on the river to make sure we're delivering at the right time and not too little, not too much. The 15-mile reach can use a lot of water. In 2021, there was a couple days where the flows in the Colorado River were 100 CFS. And our recovery program, the Upper Colorado Endangered Fish Recovery Program, recommends that in a dry year, flows be 810 CFS. So think about that, 810, 100. That's not a lot of water in a really big river. And at that time last year, we were releasing another 100 CFS. So we did double the river, keeping it up at 200. So that stretch can use a lot of water. At the same time, we're making deliveries right now out of Root Eye Reservoir. That water travels down the Frying Pan River, down the Roaring Fork River, and then to the 15-mile reach. And we're being really careful we don't deliver too much water into the Frying Pan right now because the Frying Pan is a very valuable fishery. So using the reservoirs, it's really great. Again, it's kind of shades of gray. There's a lot to work with there, and we're kind of just trying to do the best that we can to help out the river by doing this retiming. This slide, it shows the amount of water we've delivered over years. with our 15-mile reach project. We just got it going a couple years ago. So first year, 300 plus acre feet. Now we're delivering 4,500 acre feet a year to the 15-mile reach. So it's a lot of water. But I like this picture especially because in order to enter this agreement with Grand Valley water users in Orchard Mesa, we made a contribution to rebuilding their new hydroelectric facility. By virtue of this century-old piece of infrastructure being there, it brings water down to the 15-mile reach where the endangered fish are. And we have a lot of different Colorado water users working on making that a possibility. So in this picture, we have nonprofit employees, we have irrigation water users, we've got Bureau of Reclamation, we've got the reclamation program or the recovery program. We've got a lot of different water users working together. So I think we really are taking over a century's worth of infrastructure and the priority system and making the best of it. That's all I have. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions.
So in the Boulder, they're doing an in-stream flow augmentation plan.
Just a second, excuse me. Can I do this or is it being recorded? Thank you.
In the Pooter, they're doing an in-stream flow augmentation plan where you're using an augmentation plan to provide water for in-stream flow. And it seems to me like that is a very powerful tool where you could deliver upstream storage to, for example, downstream agriculture and benefit the stream at the same time. Can you speak to that as a tool, and how useful is that?
Sure. So the Water Trust is one of the co-applicants on the Water Court application, which seeks approval of the plan for augmentation. So we've been working with water users on the Pooter to use their augmentation water for in-stream flow purposes. So Fort Collins, Greeley, and Thornton all have water that's decreed for augmentation use on the Pooter that we'd use. Most of that water is not stored, but it's an example of a structure that could be used for stored water, deliver it downstream for agricultural irrigation or other purposes, and then protect it as in-stream flow on the way. I think it's a really powerful tool. I especially appreciate it having come from private practice, working with a lot of clients who face a lot of pressures, and the idea of that is to use water that's decreed for augmentation and boost stream flows without impacting existing operations and uses of water, which I think is a potentially very powerful tool working within the appropriation system.
Okay, let's thank Kate. Put the next.
Yeah, I got it.
Yep. Great. Well, I'm excited for this next talk for a couple of reasons. One is I want to honor the conference attendees for inviting some people who are water users, citizens, right? Have a couple of great ideas. Haven't been around water a long time. I know often it's like you got to show your thing at the door. Are you an engineer? Are you with an NGO? Are you water thing? I said, well, these are water users who said, we have ideas. We're thinking about water. They both actually have a lot of water experience, but today they're representing themselves as citizens. Ian and Martin are going to kind of walk this through. I've known Martin for a long time, former student, critical thinker, and I'm really looking forward to what they have to say today. So Ian and Martin, talk a little bit about digitization, moving into the 21st century.
Is this on? Can you hear it? Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm going to briefly introduce our topic, then we'll introduce ourselves individually and proceed with our presentation. Our presentation is titled How Digital Diversion, Demand Management Systems Can Benefit Water Administrators and Water Users. So next. In this presentation, we argue that by digitally tracking diversion demands in real time, we can add a third eye to the Colorado Decision Support System. We refer to it as the CDSS. By creating a system of real-time data administration, our proposal intends to integrate demand management with daily water administration. And my name is Ian Ferrell. I grew up in Colorado, and I've been a lawyer here since 2014. I have both a professional and academic background in Western water law policy. After graduating law school in 2014, I was an attorney with a Grand County law firm representing several water and sanitation districts, a water conservancy district, and many private water users. After several years in Grand County, I moved back to Denver and created my own law firm. And I continue to do a lot of water stuff, but I've kind of do it a bunch of property, land use, kind of whatever, some civil litigation. Since I have my own law firm, I can't really, got to do whatever comes my way. And I met Martin while I was still working in Grand County, and we were at a water conference. I think it was some type of like Colorado Water Congress. That was a while ago. Time flies. That was like 8 years ago. And we've remained friends ever since. And when we hang out, we can't stop talking about water rights issues, and which led us to apply for and give this presentation about what we think is a very important topic.
As Ian said, we're both. Sorry. As Ian said, we're both very happy to be here today, and thanks for the opportunity for us to present this topic. My name is Martin James Sarley. I moved to Colorado in 2012 from northern Chicagoland when I wanted to pursue a career relating to water rights, and they didn't teach anything relating to water rights in northern Colorado, or northern Illinois, so I had to move to Colorado. I graduated from the University of Colorado Boulder in 2018 after completing one additional year at the University of Denver. I was lucky to intern with Denver Water at Gross Reservoir pre-expansion and get some real first-hand experience administering on-stream reservoirs. And then I was extremely fortunate to be selected to be the Deputy Water Commissioner for Districts 5 and 6 for 3 water years and be mentored by Commissioner Bob Carlson, who had been Commissioner for 30 years. And I'm currently with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, but the only thing you all need to remember is that these opinions are my own. I am not representing the CDPHE in this presentation, and my opinions do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the state of Colorado.
All right. Overall, the general concepts underlying our presentation concern the fact that we think there's a general void in water user demand data in Colorado's water administration system. And essentially, in terms of bettering our system, we cannot fix what we do not know, and we need to know more. Because of this void in demand data, uncertainty in commodity quantity and value leads to inflated prices and costs. In order to try to fill this void, a transparent system which tracks user demand will reduce prohibitory transactional costs so that the CDSS exists for the benefit of all water administrators and water users. This will hopefully lead to resource savings, greater economic efficiency, and it would provide everyone with an accessible source of accumulated data. Colorado water law system is a constitutionally based system of prior appropriation based on historical use rights, quote unquote, first in time, first in right. Under this system, water rights are determined by priority date of first beneficial use. The first to use or to divert water for a beneficial use acquires right to use water in front of more junior water rights when there's not enough water in a drainage basin to satisfy all water user demand. Water users obtain water through decrees issued by the Colorado State Water Courts, which formally marks the historical timing of when a user put water to a beneficial use.
Okay. I'm going to briefly go over water administration in Colorado. Some of you may already be familiar with this, so this is just very general overview. So as the name suggests, prior appropriation systems are administered by water rights, or administer water rights based on priority, or more specifically a priority date or administration number. An administration number is calculated using a consistent formula, producing a value based on appropriation date, adjudication date, and any other court actions that may have been related to that water right since its original decree. And this is a little more accurate than using a priority date because you can get some detail with these digits here. And essentially, priority with administration numbers is ranked most senior, being closest to 1.0, and the closer you are to 99.999, the more junior you are. So you can figure out where you lie on a system very accurately, and the decimal points give you specific information about your actual decree when it's been changed or transferred, so you know where you align with the rest of the system. Water districts are administered by their division engineer's office through the use of a water commissioner, and they administer priority as their main job and maximize the beneficial use of water. And the administration of priority is based on a call being requested by a senior water right. The priority date or administration number of the calling right sets the call on the river, where all other diverters must respect that call to not injure it. When there is no call, the situation is also often referred to as free river, but I'd like you all to think, every time you hear free river, just think no call. There is no such thing as free water. And I want to go on to tributary administration here. So I'm going to do a brief overview of tributary administration because tributary administration can be seen as a simplified version of water basin administration. Tributaries can be called out by downstream calls, and if you look at the South Platte system, it's also tributary to the Platte, and it can be called out by downstream calls or interstate compacts. So there's a lot of similarities that you can draw between mountain tributaries and basin administration as a whole. I also want to note that some of these lessons can be applied down to individual ditch systems to improve efficiency even on a lower level. Since tributaries are subject to downstream calls, tributary diverters are often concerned they are letting more water pass than they need to satisfy downstream calling demand. We are going to show how downstream demands are not well represented in the current CDSS and how we hope to reduce conflict by increasing transparency between tributaries and water basins by showing real-time demands accurately.
All right, here's a brief overview of our proposed concept. We believe that the CDSS can be improved by adding a third eye, which tracks and displays real-time diversion demands. The current CDSS only has two eyes. First, it tracks and displays active call information, and second, it tracks and displays stream and diversion flow information from gauging stations. We suggest that combining all three eyes of the CDSS will improve administration capabilities while increasing transparency and transaction capacity while reducing market uncertainty. We believe that short-term efficiencies will be gained from transparency and that adding a third eye will lead to long-term benefits for water users, administrators, and the Colorado water system in general.
So I'm briefly going to go over the existing two eyes of the Colorado Decision Support System and show you how they relate back to daily water commissioner activities. So we're going to quickly review the historic call system, and then we're going to move on to the station Streamflow station, and then relate these back to the daily water administrator goals. So this is the homepage for the CDSS. If you're not already familiar with it, this is a great resource, and I'm going to stick around after if anyone needs help setting this up on their phone. Be happy to help you do that. But this is where you can go to view the current two eyes of the CDSS, being the active call system and the active monitored station system. Next slide. So we're starting with the active call system because this system is consistent across all the water divisions. Where with the station system, there's not as many stations in all water divisions, so it's not as useful for all users, but everyone's going to be able to come here and see the active call for their district. There are four options to select from. Most people are only ever going to use the active call option. The historical calls are mainly if you're doing some sort of call analysis for like historic consumptive use or something of that nature. Next page. So this is the screenshot of active calls for Division 1 I took last month on September 12th after the 4 p.m. call change. I've set the page up a little bit differently than you'll see it when you first load the page, but what I really just wanted to show you guys is when you come to this website, on the left is where you input the information that you want to search for, and on the right is where you get your results. The other important point I want to note is that even though this shows the active call, the calling location, it does not show the demand for that actual call. So you could look up our water right and see, oh, they have 100 CFS potential for their decree. How much do they actually want of that? And that's not well represented on this current system. Next page. And just to go over an overview, as I mentioned, the Colorado Decision Support System is the official point where you will be able to see your active calls for your district on any given day. It can change up to 4 times a day, and you should always check it at night as well to see if there's an active call being changed for the morning. And as I said, this system does not display the quantity of demand needed to satisfy a call, and we hope that adding a third eye will fill in that data void and allow users to see exactly how much water they need to send down to satisfy a calling demand. And so this is the CDSS stations page. If you go onto this, the stations light is the mobile-friendly version. I highly recommend use that version on your phone. And as I said, if you need help getting that set up, I'm happy to. So this station system is great because it shows you the real-time streamflow stations, like river gauges, as well as diversions, what they're taking in real time. And you can relate that to calling rights in some way, but it's difficult. There's a lot of information that is missed based on other users' demands, and it would make historical consumptive use analysis much easier if there was a third eye able to connect these points back together. And as I said, the system has a similar layout to the active calling page, and the only point I really want to make here is you search for your district or the water information you're looking for on the left, and it displays information on the right, and then it's up to you to correlate the rest of that information manually. And this brings me back to the point of how this relates to daily water commissioner activities. These are the main two resources water commissioners use to determine what call needs to be set besides getting phone calls in and other sources from the water users. So these tools are what your water commissioner is looking at every single day when they determine what administration functions need to be captured. And having a third eye tracking the demand would actually make the water commissioner's jobs much easier because everything would be in a centralized location. They wouldn't be relying on people to call them, send them text messages, emails, or in some cases long-range radio to tell them what their demand is that day. Next slide. And then I just also wanted to mention that when these data points are taken from these active monitoring stations, that data creates what's called an XQ0 water through headgate diversion record column. And we're suggesting that by creating a third eye to the CDSS, you can make a similar sort of column with demand. So in the diversion record every year, you could have a demand column next to the actual quantitative amount column, and you could see if your demand's being met, if you're taking more, and other users would be able to see that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, or if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, somebody might be able to call you out on it. And then I just want to go over a little bit of the daily functions of the water commissioner. Every day, the water commissioner must determine demands manually. So people call them, send them text messages, email, and like I said, we even use long-range radios for some people. And it takes a long time to be able to determine what your daily demand is. You're spending hours on the phone. There's a line of people waiting to talk to you, and sometimes you need to call somebody else back because somebody else's demand has influenced the other person's demand, and you need to change the entire calling system. Usually, the commissioner is doing this from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., and it's a very busy part of their morning, when it'd be really nice if you had a third eye to the CDSS where a user could come into a portal and just input what their demand is, what water right they're using, and then it's all tracked there automatically for the water commissioner instead of them having to have a manual process. And there are aids that the water commissioners have from the Division of Water Resources, such as Excel sheets and spreadsheets, but I still go back to this as a manual process. They have to talk to somebody on the phone, write something down, and then transfer it into a spreadsheet, which is taking a lot of time that the water commissioner could be out administering your district and maximizing the beneficial use of the water. And I'm just going to really briefly go over how a diversion record is made. Every year, even if they don't have digital demand monitoring stations or digital monitoring stations at CFlow, the water commissioner will be out in the field quantifying the resource and then administering it. That is the main job of the water commissioners, to quantify and then administer the resource. They take all of their notes through the year, and then they compile them into a diversion record and they publish it. And then it's up to the water user to go back and read that diversion record in diversion coding and figure out if their water was actually accurately represented for that year. And it's a time-consuming process. Most people need to hire somebody to do it because they don't understand how to do it themselves. If we had a third eye monitoring digital demand, you'd be able to see in real time that your demand was tracked by the CDSS, and then it's going into the diversion record, and the use of the water can be tracked as well. So the commissioner is not going to have to keep track of, oh, they took 5 CFS that day. Was it CBT industrial? Was it CBT agricultural? Was it Free River? Was it some other reservoir release? There's a lot of different source of supply issues that could be easily taken care of and then verified automatically, instantaneously by the water user because they know that's what they put in that day. And if there's ever some sort of conflict, it can be resolved in real time instead of at the end of the year when the diversion record has been published.
So under the current CDSS, there is no state system that transparently tracks user demands. Rather, water commissioners and administrators must keep track of water demands themselves. Water diverters can only see the active call in the system, and they cannot see the quantity of demand for that call. Moreover, the system that tracks river and diversion flow quantities does not actively communicate to the system tracking active calls. As a result of this data void and disconnect, it can be difficult to correlate active call engaging station data when conducting historic consumptive use analysis or determining if an administration action was appropriate. Also, the active calling rights system does not clearly show if flows are being taken at alternative points of diversion, making it even more difficult to track water use. Next. We believe that adding a third eye to the CDSS, which digitally tracks diversion demands in real time, will improve our current system. Integrating the 3 eyes of the CDSS will serve as a transparent digital aid to water commissioners. In order to create unity between diversion records, we argue that we should adopt demand tracking into yearly diversion records as a demand column across all water districts.
I'm kind of going to briefly go over some basic flow charts of how the system exists currently and how we would like to see the system exist in the future. So currently, every morning, a ditch superintendent or the ditch company goes through their ditch and figures out what their demand is. They have their own process for doing that, and they have their own bylaws. And as I said, some of these lessons can be applied to ditch companies to make their own systems more effective. And there are some very effective ditch companies out there, like the Left Hand Ditch Company. So after the dish company determines what flow they actually need for that day, they contact the water commissioner. As I said, it could be a phone call, text message, email, or long-range radio, or smoke signals, I guess, technically. But they let them know, hey, I need water and in what quantity. The commissioner keeps track of all that information themselves, and then they go and update the active call system if a call needs to be changed. And theoretically, that could be the end of the information chain. Nobody else in the district could ever know what your demand is because the water commissioner may not have ever conveyed that to anyone else, not that they necessarily have to. But there's a lot of information just kind of dies with the commissioner, and it's difficult when a commissioner leaves because they have so much knowledge with them. It takes a long time to reestablish these sort of connections and to be able to reestablish a constant flow. So we are suggesting that by adding a third eye to the CDSS, the system can be improved. So instead of this user contacting the water commissioner directly every day, they'll log into a centralized portal where they'll have some system that's secure and they know that no one else can log in on their behalf. And that system will ask them some basic questions. How much water are you requesting today? What water right are you requesting it under? And what use are you going to be putting that water to? Which is the main part of a diversion record and a lot of what the water commissioner is just spending time manually doing anyways. From that point, the CDSS can automatically start a communication chain between the water commissioner and the other two eyes of the CDSS. And there would be needing to be some engineering, software engineering done here by the state to make this work, but essentially, if you know what the demands are, and the system knows what the demands are, it can then reference to the real-time diversion stations that are taking what the ditch is diverting off of the river in real time, and then also compare that to the active call system, and automatically alert the water commissioner or the other users if there's some sort of potential for injury to be occurring. Which, right now, the water commissioner has to keep track of that. They have to go back onto the CDSS station site, and they have to look and they see, are you taking the amount of water you're supposed to be? Or if they don't have that, they have to drive out to your head gate and actually look at the amount of water you're taking and make a diversion record based off of that. So we're saying that by adding this third eye, instead of the information chain just dying, it actually becomes a record. And then it's automatically done for the water commissioner, saving them time. And at the same time, the rest of the system is communicating between the other users so everyone can see what's going on. And I would like to make a point that there's ditches that may run, say, 20 CFS most of the summer, but they have hay. And so they're going to stop using that 20 CFS for a few days to dry out. Well, if you don't know that they're going to stop diverting for their hay those days, there's no way you can pick up that water downstream. If you're a downstream user, that would be in priority for that. So now, instead of relying on the water commissioner to have to transmit this information to you, you can log on and see, oh, the ditch above me is taking 20 CFS less than it was yesterday, or that's what their demand's going to be tomorrow. I have the potential to get my ditch rider out there and actually capture that water, because most of the time, you don't even know the water's going by, or the ditch superintendent's not, around 24/7. They don't live at the head gate to get the water immediately. So this is just how we think the system could be improved by doing these basic changes of demand management. Okay. And I'll just go back, continue on the point that the system really, I think, it will help old users, but really the water commissioners are going to be aided because this is pretty much a digital water commissioner aid. It's taking a huge part of their job, which is time consuming and tedious, and every morning they have to do it again and again when they could just have a system where everyone logs in as soon as they know their demand. What if they know their demand the night before? It'd be great for the water commissioner to know that 12 hours in advance because it gives you a lot of time to plan how you actually physically go to get water to that location. The more time you have, the better. And by adding a real-time demand management system, the water commissioners are just going to be given more time to administer your resource to the maximum beneficial use, which is the best thing that can happen for your individual district.
All right. So how will the CDSS-based real-time demand management help diverters? We believe it will help fill the current diversion demand flow data voids, allowing for maximum beneficial use of water. It will help improve transaction administration capacity across the state on short-term and long-term timescales. We believe it will increase confidence in administration through transparent operations and reduce transaction costs by reducing historic consumptive use analysis costs. And next, how would real-time demand management system help the overall Colorado water system? We believe it would help fix data collection deficiencies and inefficiencies within existing laws and frameworks, and we believe it would improve our ability to analyze intertwined webs of historical demand rights in order to implement management systems benefiting individual users and the system in whole. A demand management portal will create a consistent way for water users to interact with administrators across the state and unify at least one part of all diversion records. So what resources will be needed in the short term? The CDSS will need to be expanded to securely request daily demands, and it will need to be maintained by the state. And each water district will need to create a conforming process. In the long term, additional stream gauging and post-diversion stations will need to be added to better maximize the efficient use of water. And the question of who will need to participate arises. We strongly believe that in order to properly implement this change, everybody would need to jump together. We believe that every user in the entire system must jump together and at once so no one feels targeted. And this would be even include water rights without administration numbers. But we indeed acknowledge that some interim solutions would need to be devised to assist outliers. And overall, we must acknowledge that this would be just the beginning in attempting to fill our current system's general void in water user data. And again, in terms of bettering our system, we cannot fix what we do not know. And we need to know more. We cannot maximize what we do not know. Demand management would serve as a first step towards obtaining a more comprehensive quantitative system. There is an overwhelming amount of demand-dependent data that needs to be quantified and then administered beyond the scope of this demand management proposal. As quantitative capacity increases, prohibitory transaction fees will likely decrease, and we believe obtaining more knowledge and data about user demand will serve as a vital key.
Thank you.
Thank you. We need to move on, but I know Ian and Martin will be around if you want to ask them more specific questions or get your mobile phone active so you can start looking up that data. Really appreciate that. That was an interesting thought. Tell students all the time you can't manage what you can't measure, right? And we know there's a lot of areas in water. We could use better measurement from urban to ag, that kind of thing. So next, if we can have our next slide up there. Great. So we're going to have Noah, Maya, and Adam in some combination talk to us a little bit about how administration might be some more supportive of all the activities you're doing on the ground, right? Doing great work. We've heard that. That's a huge focus of this kind of conference, trying to bring watershed health, move it forward, right? But we also have to have policies and administration that supports that. So I'll pass it up. Are you presenting alone?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm going to go first.
Okay, great. Well, I have another, if you want to use this, whoever's up next. Thank you, Maya.
All right. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm Maya. I'm the director of the Boulder Watershed Collective, and I'm going to be presenting with Noah Greenberg from SWCA and Adam Kremers from Brown and Caldwell. And we are working on a pilot project at Toland Ranch, which is in the headwaters of South Boulder Creek. This is the outline of what we're going to be talking about today. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of this area, which is a really amazing, beautiful area. Let's see if, does this, oh, there's no, okay. So up there you can see the Moffett Tunnel. The Moffett Tunnel this is the east portal of the Moffett Tunnel. So if you go through the Moffett Tunnel, you end up in Winter Park. And so this is the headwaters of South Boulder Creek, which is transports water through the Moffett Tunnel from the Fraser River in the Colorado Basin over into the South Boulder Creek, which runs into Gross Reservoir and is a primary water source for Denver Water and a lot of water users on the Front Range. So this is a really important area, and the outline of what you see here is the Toland Ranch property. It is a privately owned property. So we are working on this project to see if we can transform the use of some relic gravel pits into more functional ecological and habitat areas. Fly around me. So you might not know it, but if you drive around and notice ponds alongside rivers, many of those off-channel ponds are actually old gravel pits that were used to develop roads, build reservoirs, and now they have become these beautiful ponds that we are very used to, but they're not typically part of that natural system. And oftentimes, even though they do provide some habitat, it's maybe not the most functional habitat or delivers the appropriate amount of hydrology to really support highly functional wetlands and riparian areas. So we feel that the approach that we are considering is one possible way to try to transform some of these areas into more ecologically beneficial areas. So the Toll family at Toland Ranch here has owned this property for more than 120 years. They obtained the property in the late 1800s, and there still is a town there, but it's very small now, but it used to be a real town, the town of Toland, and it was an active rail stop along this rail line that went up to Rollins Pass, and many of the people on the Front Range in the Denver area used to take the train up, stop at Toland, which had a dance hall and some bars and, a roundhouse to switch the trains. It was a really lovely day to go up into the mountains and see the Continental Divide and all of the, beautiful areas up there. So the family, additionally, I don't know if you can see it here. I have some other pictures, but there also was an ice lake there. So the rail line also, they chipped ice from the lake and then transported it down to Denver. So there were many uses in this area. And this family, the Toll family, has always been very conservation-minded. Roger Toll from the early 1900s, he was the second superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park. He was one of the founders of the Colorado Mountain Club, and he contributed to building one of the structures up at the Keyhole at Long's Peak. So they are like a very mountain Colorado family, very conservation-minded. And but the next generation, Roger's sons, donated 1,400 acres to be combined with Forest Service property to develop the James Peak Wilderness area in 2002. So that is now, a really amazing, beautiful area with many trails up at the Moffett Tunnel. It's really too busy during the weekends, so you should try and go up there during the week. It's definitely discovered now, but it's a really amazing area. And then the next generation, the current generation that we're working with, really worked with many agencies to put this property into a conservation easement in 2015. So that's 3,300 acres of land, really surrounded by public lands and Forest Service. That is now a great buffer area in this really important headwaters of South Boulder Creek. And I did meet the sons of the current generation. I guess they're in their 40s, two brothers. They were named Charles and Darwin. So they're conservation-minded, and they love evolutionary biology, too. Let's see. So this is a historical photo of the area that we're looking at. So Toland Ranch includes a lot of upland forested areas, but there is this really large meadow area there as well, which contained a really lovely meandering stream at one point. I can't follow notes when I'm actually giving a presentation. So this is what it looked like in 1953, but the times have changed, and we're learning from the past, and we're bridging to the future right now. And so in the 1950s, the channel was straightened in that area to facilitate transport of water, South Boulder Creek water, but also water from the western slope, downstream into Gross Reservoir to facilitate the growing populations on the Front Range that needed drinking water. And so a lot of these, you can see the off-channel ponds there that were gravel pits used to construct the river, the straightened river, but also roads and dams in the area. And so these are the existing conditions that we're working with today, and wondering if we can help transform some of these areas into more beneficial habitat. I'm going to pass it on to Noah.
Thank you, Maya. So one of the things that I like to think about when I look at this is trying to understand what are the impacts of what happened. When the folks came in here and they designed this river to convey water from Moffett Tunnel to Gross Reservoir effectively through this flat, broad valley, they channelized the creek, South Boulder Creek, and so they put it in a straight alignment. They took away the sinuosity, they put on berms to keep those flood flows confined to within the channel. And what happens when you straighten a river if you don't change anything else? You have more hydraulic energy. So they also constructed drop structures. And you can see these in the photo, and we have some other photos where they show up better. And some of those drop structures are small, 2 to 3 feet. Others are upwards of 10 feet or more vertical drop. And so you create a very interesting hydrology in that valley as you start to have the river normal river water surface level dropping 10 feet very rapidly over a short distance. You also see that these areas that were historically part of the floodplain that would have had channel migration, flood flows, high alluvial groundwater, those areas are now isolated from the South Boulder Creek system. And so even during flood events, water from the creek is not entering those areas. Water from those areas can enter the creek. There were some culverts installed through the berms to allow water to pass from the upland areas into the creek. But in general, those areas aren't available for flood storage or floodwater improvement. Here's a photo taken shortly after that work was done. And so you can still see that those pits that were constructed off of the channel, they're still raw. They haven't revegetated around the perimeter. The ice lake is right here. And so you can see that that channel is exceedingly straight. And here's a photo taken in contemporary times looking downstream, and you see those drop structures, and you see the gravel pits, and you can tell that the surface of the water of the creek is generally lower than the adjacent ponds, except for in areas where you have those drop structures, and they're creating a hydrologic backup, which one of the things that we noticed, this was an aha moment, was that the ponds that are located immediately upstream from those drop structures have relatively stable water surface. The ponds that are located downstream of the drop structures have highly variable water surface. And we speculate that's because in the spring you have groundwater coming in and all of the ponds are getting that groundwater contribution. But later in the summer when flows in alluvial water is really dictated by South Boulder Creek flows, which are dictated by Moffett Tunnel diversions, the water that's, you don't have that groundwater coming in, downstream of the drop structures, there's not the alluvial water to support those features. And so looking at this from the perspective of an ecologist, I like to think about what are some of the impacts of what happened. And here's a small picture of South Boulder Creek, and we have the pre-channelization photo above and the post-channelization photo below. And there's a loss of functional stream habitat. That's actually what's in South Boulder Creek. There's a loss of some of the riffle pool complexes. There's a loss of that floodplain ecosystem. You also have an increase in open water surface area. When you look at those gravel pits and you look at how much open water is present there, there's an extraordinary amount of additional evaporative loss occurring across this reach compared to historic conditions. You have a decrease in hydrologic connectivity to the floodplain. South Boulder Creek flood flows are no longer accessing the historic floodplain, but rather they're confined to that new canal. And you have adverse hydrologic modifications to wetlands as a result of those drop structures and how the alluvial groundwater is no longer at a constant or near constant surface below the floodplain ground surface elevation. What you have is that groundwater is dropping out in many of the locations. And when I went out here to do a wetland delineation about 8 years ago, what we found is that there's a lot of relict wetlands. Those are wetlands where you have willows that were present before this work occurred. They have deep roots that can chase the groundwater down, but the understory vegetation has converted to an upland herbaceous vegetation layer that is present because there's no longer that high groundwater for enough of the growing season. And so when I was first met with the Toll family and I heard their story and about how they remembered this area before the channelization and what their grandfathers dreamed of for the land, we started to think about what might we do if we wanted to restore some of the ecological function of this area and some of the aesthetic beauty of the area. And we recognized that we couldn't go in and we couldn't modify South Boulder Creek. It's a critical infrastructure that's delivering water to Denver. That's not something that was touchable. But we could work potentially in those areas outside of the creek, and we could work to make them better so that those areas that were historically part of the floodplain were becoming more functional, and we were restoring some of the services that they provided. And so we, working with Parks and Wildlife and Boulder Watershed Collective, we developed a project to create side channel riparian stream corridors that would restore the impaired ecosystem function. As a result of this side system being totally off channel and we can control the water supply, we also viewed it as an exciting opportunity to restore greenback cutthroat trout to some of their native habitat in an area where they wouldn't interbreed with other trout that would hybridize with them. And so that's one thing Parks and Wildlife is really excited about, is to have this system that they can manage and they can control for the rearing of greenback cutthroat trout. That's a really important thing, especially as we have wildfires. The Cameron Peak fire imperiled many of the areas where they were working to reintroduce greenback cutthroat trout. This would provide some resiliency to that program. We also thought that we could reduce evaporation from open water areas that have limited habitat value. That's something that's it's a bit of a passion of mine, is looking around the landscape. Where do we have water features that are constructed that have high rates of evaporation but don't provide a lot of habitat? They're not providing ecosystem services. They're drains on the system. And this is one area where I believe we could do that. And I think as we look around the gravel pits that dot so much of our landscape of the state, we're going to see a lot of other opportunities for gravel pits that have lots of evaporative losses, but they're not connected to the corridor system. They're not providing habitat that they could be. And so I view those as potentially wasteful scenarios and areas where we can improve it. So the Drainageway Restoration Project, this is highly conceptual and it's going to be hard to see from back there, but what you can see is that in the existing conditions we have large open water features. Those are blue. We also have this orange colored area, which is the relict wetlands. They're no longer meeting the wetland criteria, but they have these willows that are remnants from the past. And so what we are working to do, and we're working with tailwater, and we're working to develop a design that will convert some of those open water areas to wetland areas and to convert some of the relict wetlands to functional wetlands. And the way that we're proposing to do that is by reintroducing some flow to this system. We want to reintroduce, or rather allow, South Boulder Creek flows to access the portions of the floodplain that they historically accessed. And we want to fill in some of those those pond areas to be wetlands and small, narrow channels that greenback cutthroat trout can spawn in. And we're working to just work within the landscape, work within the historic footprint of the floodplain to restore some of those ecological functions. And so the goal for this, and this is another aha moment, and I think, Kate, I have to give you credit for this because we were talking, just brainstorming, and you were giving us some good ideas. Initially, we thought that this project would be something that would require a lot of water rights. We'd have to develop an augmentation plan to divert water. And we viewed that as being a economically prohibitive hurdle for the project. We rather, though, started to realize that maybe we could design the project so that it would be a net benefit for the overall water availability, water abundance in the South Boulder Creek system. So we could reduce open water areas, we could keep the channel small, we could have modest open water areas where greenback cutthroat trout could be reared, but on the whole, open water areas would be reduced, and so the downstream water users would be left whole. And that's really the strategy that we're working towards today. We don't think we need to create more evaporative loss than is present currently or present historically, but rather aim towards something that's going to be mimicking the historic hydrology of the area and not require an augmentation plan. And so we want to reduce open water surface areas. We want to view the connection of the hydrology. The source of the water for this feature is not going to be an actual active diversion, but rather passive hydrology that will let water access the portions of the floodplain it historically did. And we're really keen to work with all the stakeholders to make sure that no other water rights users on the system feel like they're going to be injured. And so that's the goal. However, though, we still have hurdles with how the Division of Water Resources administers water law, and Adam's going to talk about that and how the situation we're in and the goal that we're in, even though it's going to result in less water use, it's going to satisfy water rights owners, there's still not a clear pathway for us to get Division of Water Resources approval for this type of project.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you. So with the modifications to South Boulder Creek in the 1960s, these gravel pits fall under this pre-1981 scenario, which is actually specifically paragraph 11B of the Colorado Revised Statute 3790-137, which says that the depletions that result from these ponds does not need to be replaced to the river. Further meaning that there is no augmentation plan, there's no substitute water supply plan that replaces the evaporative depletions. Excuse me. That replaces the evaporative depletions that occur from the open water surface area from these ponds. And so because there's no depletive requirement for these ponds, that is a loss to the system. And that loss is not part of the administration of the river. But instead of thinking of this as a loss, we're now thinking of it more as a credit to the system. And so, thank you. We can do that by, let's metaphorically create a bucket that is our evaporative loss for the system, and that is completely full historically from 1960 when these ponds were created, and it is removed from the river. It is not returned to the river. If we were to reduce that pond surface area at any level, then our evaporative depletions also thereby reduce, and some of that evaporative loss that is stored in our bucket is returned back to the river, and creating a benefit or a credit compared to our historical conditions, which is what we are hoping to propose here, and something that I think this is where we're hoping that there's an opportunity and possibly a shift in policy, because there are limitations associated with this credit, because the revised statute suggests that if there are any modifications or changes made to the exposed groundwater surface area associated with gravel pits that are in a pre-1981 scenario, then there could be an augmentation plan or substitute water supply plan to replace said depletions. But this is where we see an opportunity here because of this credit of water that we are seeing from this reduction in our open water surface area as part of this project. I think I pushed the green. Okay. So we'll flash forward to current conditions, and in 2021, SWCA went out and measured the current open water surface area of the combined gravel pits at Tolan Ranch, and what they measured was a combined surface area of about 3.2 acres. And I have not said this yet either, but back in 1960, we delineated the open pond surface area of the gravel pits that were constructed, the 5 ponds, and that was about 10 acres of surface area. So if we go back to our evaporative loss metaphor here, if our bucket is completely full with evaporative loss associated with 10 acres of open surface area, and now we've reduced down to 3, we've now had to pour some water back into the river that is available for users on South Boulder Creek and the ecological uses on the creek. So now let's flash forward even further to our conceptual conditions, which we're going to further reduce the pond surface area and actually remove some of the ponds, as Noah showed. And the estimated surface area of those ponds is actually only going to be 2.63 acres. So we are further reducing from 10 to 3.2 down to 2.63. So again, that since the 1960s, that's been a loss to South Boulder Creek that is not seen from the benefit of any users on South Boulder Creek, but then also no ecological benefit either. And here's a table that we're looking at to show that reduction and sort of this credit of water that is going to be a benefit compared to our historical conditions. And really what we see here is a shift in policy and a shift in the way that we think about these gravel pits in Colorado, and that there are these gravel pits, they're all over the state, they're adjacent to our rivers, and there's real opportunity here to modify these conditions and return these losses back to the stream system and provide an ecological benefit. And we hope that this project and the Toll family provide a proper test case for this situation in Colorado. And we really still have a lot of legwork to do here, because we've really brought this to this point today. But I think that with proper coordination with other water users on South Boulder Creek and DWR, I think there's a real benefit that we can all realize here. And so I think, should we give I can give our proper acknowledgments as well, but definitely the Toll family. Maya and Noah have been working with the Toll family for a long time, and they, as Maya said, they are conservationists at heart. Charles and Darwin as the children, I think, is a great representation. But I think they're just incredible stewards of this project, and why that we see this as a fantastic test case. And as you guys drive all around Colorado, you guys see these gravel pits all over. And while some of them are not pre-1981 and they do have augmentation plans and substitute water supply plans, there are many gravel pits that are in this pre-1981 scenario that are just not a part of our administration of the river and could provide a benefit that we could see really help Colorado. So I think with that, we'll open the door to questions. Thank you.
We've got time for one question. Whoops, sorry. And the rest of you can do after.
I better make it a good one then. Yeah. What's your strategy for addressing the policy piece with DWR? Are you engaging them directly on this specific issue? Are you going a little higher to kind of broaden these kinds of restorative concepts and the impacts to water resources and bridging that gap? Like, what's your plan for that?
Yeah, so first we'll address this specific case and see if we can just have, because of the partners that are part of this and because of, because of the people that are involved, I think that there's more opportunity to address this on like a one-off. But I think going forward, and that's why I put in the SWSP and the ATM processes, I think those could be a good avenue for a way for DWR to create a streamlined process for something like this that could, make this process happen faster. Because the reason that the revised statute's in place is the depletive impact and the maintenance of these gravel pits. It was a burden on gravel operators, and that's why it exists. But now we flash forward to today, and we have, bridging from the past, learning from the past, and coming to the future. How do we move this forward? And so I think I see that as really the next step. Potentially changing the revised statutes as well.
Thank you very much. I'll take advantage of my opportunity as a moderator to ask. So has, for example, the Interim Legislative Committee on Water, have they had this presentation? Okay, great. So we're just at the beginning of it. Great. Thanks so much. Okay. Swap it out. Okay. Thank you so much. Now we're down to our last presentation here from Heather, who's going to talk a little bit about, from a Southern Colorado perspective, how do we get more out of our reservoirs, right? Another opportunity for looking to the future. We've heard a lot about, we have we have to applaud, really incredible amount of infrastructure of our water resources. And I think the challenge now is how do we make the most of that? How do we make the most of our water? How do we use those infrastructure elements in ways that serve a broader range of values as we move forward in the 21st century? Heather.
Thank you very much. Just want to pause maybe and acknowledge the conference organizers for putting together what I've really enjoyed. I think it's just really exciting to think through, where are there opportunities to work within our existing systems, to be creative and think about ecosystem services. And so well done, Jayla and team. This is really cool. I also think I'm just excited that I got to go after Kate. I think you set this up really well with your masterclass in water rights and the things that the Water Trust is doing. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about will really build off of the trend that others have laid this morning of, here's an example where some folks came together with some trust and friendship and creativity, and we're trying to think of ways that we can look out for the organizations that we manage while also improving the health of the Rio Grande and its tributaries. So this is the story of 4 entities coming together to do just that, to think about how we are managing 2 pre-compact reservoirs in southern Colorado and ways that we can improve management of those reservoirs if we work together and better understand each other's needs. And so the entities that were included in this project were the Conservation Fund, a really special outfit out of Boulder who helps, they help public entities and agencies figure out ways to acquire land and water kind of for the greater public good. And so they were an incredible partner in this project. The Bureau of Land Management, the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District that I manage. I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Heather Dutton. Manage the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District. And then Parks and Wildlife is a critical partner in this project. I think I'm mistakenly saying was because it's underway and hopefully lasts for a very, very long time. And so the 2 reservoirs we'll be talking about are Shaw Reservoir, and that's my prettiest picture of it on top, and then Beaver Reservoir on the bottom. And so just a little bit of scale and scope here. The Rio Grande Basin is in south central Colorado, and the map, the 2 yellow dots to the west, that one is where Shaw is located, and then the other one is where Beaver is located. And so you can see these are two relatively high elevation reservoirs on tributaries of the South Fork of the Rio Grande. And so their geographic situation provides a lot of flexibility for us to really think about how can we manage these reservoirs and think through the flow timing. And then the really neat thing is that we're benefiting these small tributaries, but all the way down to the state line in the Rio Grande. And so it's a pretty cool opportunity to get to work on managing these two facilities together. So a little bit about, what we do. Let's get to the punchline, right? I'm kind of building it up as it's some secret. So yeah, Shaw Reservoir, it's on U.S. Forest Service land. It's subject to a special use permit and a ditch bill easement. The capacity is 681 acre feet. I mentioned it's pre-compact. It's pretty significant because in part of the conditions of the Rio Grande Compact state that if the storage in Elephant Butte Reservoir, which is a massive storage facility in New Mexico, if the storage is less than 400,000 acre feet at Elephant Butte, we can't store water in post-compact reservoirs. And I think that maybe at the time of the compact, we probably thought, oh yeah, that won't happen very often. This probably won't be that restrictive. We've been in Article 7 the majority of the last 10 years, and currently there's 90,000 acre feet in a $2 million acre foot reservoir. So 90,000 versus that 400,000 threshold. So it's a big restriction to try to work with a post-compact reservoir. And so we are really pleased to be able to be part of a purchase of a pre-compact reservoir because that gives us a lot of flexibility. Historically, it was used as a supplemental supply for irrigation, and so I'm going to tell you about the ways that we purchased and we're changing the management of this reservoir. But a really neat thing to highlight is that by our district working with BLM and the Conservation Fund to purchase the reservoir, we're changing the way the water rights are used, changing the way it's been operated. It didn't require dry up of ag lands because this was a supplemental supply. So those guys have other senior surface rights. They're thinking through, deficit irrigation and different ways to manage their farms and ranches. And so we feel pretty good about not having to do a big dry up project to be able to acquire this asset. So yeah, in December of last year, we brought it over the finish line. The Conservation Fund facilitated a purchase where the Conservancy District, we now own the reservoir facilities. And so this was an important thing where sitting down with the Bureau of Land Management, we really needed storage. So the Conservancy District has a pretty broad portfolio of water rights. We run an augmentation program where we augment the injurious depletions of 1,100 wells in the San Luis Valley. So we have a lot of water rights, a lot of senior water rights, and the nature of having native water rights is that it's really important that we have places to store water so that in dry years we can make up our obligations to those well owners, which means that we were paying around $75, but sometimes as much as $93 an acre foot per year to store water, to have this kind of drought pool in privately held reservoirs. And so that was the greatest bill. Every year when I would do the budget, I would just be like, man, if we only didn't have to spend $60,000 in other people's reservoirs. And so this was a big opportunity for us to purchase a facility and be able to fill it up with our own water and save that cost of having water in other people's buckets. So yeah, we ended up with the reservoir facilities and 51% of the storage space. BLM ended up with the water rights, and so where we have quite a portfolio of water rights, BLM really needs some because they're trying to augment wells that provide a lot of really important wetland habitat. So I'll get to that here in a minute and show some pretty pictures. So that was the deal. They ended up with 49% of the space in the reservoir and the consumptive use water rights. We have the facility and our half of the space. And so all along, the thought was, well, we don't want to operate this reservoir because that's a challenge that we've seen, with it being in the hands of irrigators. This is a really incredible facility. It's neat because it's easy to get to. Relatively. You have to drive a long way, but it's a good road. And so, you can take a two-wheel drive car up there. I've seen, some low clearance sedans. So it's a popular place to go fish. It also, the nature of where it's located and how water flows through it, it grows massive fish. And so it's a really special place for people in the valley to take their families and go, catch a big fish, enjoy a Sunday, and have that special experience up in the mountains. And so given that recreation aspect and then also the fisheries aspect, this is really important to Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And a really neat thing that happens in the San Luis Valley, CPW is a really big water rights holder. They have quite a few reservoirs and they have a lot of water rights. It's kind of special. Whoever was in charge of their acquisitions 40, 50 years ago did a bang-up job because they ended up with a lot of really special water rights. And so they then turn around and work with private reservoir owners to do what we call conservation pools. And so rather than the irrigators drawing down this facility, they call CPW and say, okay, otherwise I would have taken my water out of Shaw, but I'll take it out of your facility, so I just want water. And then in turn, CPW will release native water out of Beaver Reservoir that these guys will use on their farms. So it's a win-win. And so knowing that this is a really high priority for Parks and Wildlife, we went to them and we said, what if we did that? What if we keep our water in there and we keep it full most of the time? So that frees up CPW's water, where they normally were releasing water to provide it to the irrigators. And we said, rather than you using your water to fill our bucket, we'll fill our bucket. How about in exchange for that, you give us storage? And so that's the deal we worked out. Oh, that's a terrible picture. Just maybe it allows you to imagine in your mind's eye the most beautiful reservoir you've ever seen. So Parks and Wildlife owns Beaver Reservoir. It is also pre-compact. It's 4,800 acre feet. And so they were willing to barter with us and to say, yes, they cherish Shaw Reservoir as being a fishery and being a recreation asset. And so we're all numbers, well, not all of us, right? But this group, we're numbers people, the people that worked this out. And so we actually developed this huge spreadsheet where we went through and we valued the value of keeping Shaw full, the value of a fisheries experience for visitors to the San Luis Valley. And then we turned around and we said, yes, they're giving up value by giving us space in their reservoir, but right now, Beaver it's 80% full, and 800 acre feet of that is water from the Conservancy District. And so we're also helping keep Beaver full and make it a better fishery and a better resource. And so they valued that opportunity. And so it was a really, really neat way that we kind of came together and said, okay, what does everybody need? What do we all want? And at the end of the day, now these will be healthier reservoirs. The really cool thing too is we will also have healthier fisheries. And so working together, we're able to think through our releases. I feel like before when we all weren't best buddies and we weren't talking as much, I would just kick water out of reservoirs, kind of be like, oh shoot, it's October. I need to release 20 acre feet by the end of the month, and I would just do it. And now we're all on the same page of, I send an email to all the fisheries biologists and all the other people running augmentation plans, and I say, well, I need to release 20 acre feet. How can I do it in a way that most benefits the fishery? And then the CPW guys write back and say, yeah, it's spawning, and so we would appreciate it if you did this release per day. And I say, great, tell the water commissioner. And so that's a really neat thing that's coming out of this, is that we're also, not only are we thinking about the storage in the reservoirs, but we're thinking about the releases from the reservoirs. Another thing that we agreed to as part of this big spreadsheet for our district to get a pretty massive storage pool in Beaver Reservoir, what else could we give to the state? What else could we give to you all as taxpayers in Colorado? And so we agreed that a portion of our water rights would always be released in the winter. And I really, again, I'm glad to be after Kate, but because her graph showing impacted months, that's when our streams are most impaired, is in the wintertime. That's when the reservoirs are in storage. And we're pretty fortunate because in the summertime, the majority of our water rights are far enough down in the system that we see relatively natural hydrographs. But in the wintertime, our streams are impacted. And we're storing as much water as possible, and so flows drop significantly. We see fish get stressed. They have less space to spread out. They come out, skinnier, less healthy. And so if we can put water in the river in the wintertime that meets augmentation needs, but also bolsters those flows all winter long, then that has a big benefit to the fishery. The other cool thing on that note is CPW being an entity that cares about fish. They never dry up the reaches below their reservoirs, but that means they're losing storage because they're keeping water in the river, and so then they have less water in the summer that they can do cool stuff with. So by us releasing our water in the winter, they're able to store more and free up opportunities for them to do really cool partnerships and help fish and wildlife in the valley. And so that's what that bottom line means, that they can store their water rights in place of ours. So pretty cool. The other really neat thing about this project is facilitating improvements to Blanca wetlands. And so you can see again the location of the two reservoirs. And so when I'm talking about winter flows, again, we're not just benefiting the South Fork, it's all the way down to the state line. And so we have the additional benefit of when we release water in the winter, we help pay our compact obligation to New Mexico. So it's the winds just keep piling up here. But yeah, Blanca wetlands is really important. And so I was phoning a friend before this presentation this morning. 2% of the land in Colorado is either riparian areas or wetlands. But you think about all the ecosystem services and the importance to fish and wildlife, and those of us just as people, the importance that those riparian areas and wetlands provide. But just 2% of all the state's land is riparian or wetland. In the San Luis Valley, 42% of the land is wet. And so our wetlands are of incredible significance for fish and wildlife and birds. The entire, again, Kate, you were reading my mind. Your picture of the cranes really set it up, because the entire population, 20,000 greater sandhill cranes, come through the San Luis Valley. And I could list off all these migratory birds that rely on our wetlands. And so even though we still have 42% of the wet areas in the state, the total amount of wetlands in the San Luis Valley has decreased by 50% since the 80s. So it's super important that we take care of the wetlands that we do have and find ways to work together to make sure that those wetlands last into the future, because they're so ecologically significant. And so that's another awesome thing about this project, is that we're able to move this supplemental irrigation supply over to provide augmentation, so the BLM can continue to pump wells to provide critical wetland habitat. And then this is a snazzy picture of some winter flows. So this was in March of last year when we were practicing. This whole thing, I'm telling you, yeah, we got margaritas and we worked out a plan, and it took years. And so we had a lot of time to practice. We had time for us to practice exchanging water in a beaver and see what it would be like to work together. And so this was a nice little drive for me, where I went up and said, well, gosh darn, look at that creek that's double in size because we're releasing augmentation water today. And so it's just super cool to see those wintertime benefits, but then also know that has all those other trickle-down benefits for CPW. So yeah, we're calling this a win-win-win. This is Ryan with CPW, me of course, and then Sue with BLM. We got to show off this project at a WECO mini tour of the basin a couple weeks ago, and so we're just really pleased, and I was pleased to have the opportunity to share this with you today, and I hope maybe this sparks some ideas for you all too, because I think it's this kind of stuff that's going to help us move things forward. And in the Rio Grande Basin, we have a lot of funny phrases, but kind of a serious one is we talk about doing more with less. And I think we all know that that's the reality in Colorado, is doing more with less. And so I'm really pleased to be part of this group of people, people a lot smarter than me. They just let me hang out with them, but that came up with a way to do more with less and to really think about how we can share water. So I'll leave you with, this was a really neat drawing that a friend of ours, Andrea Bachman, created for our Rio Grande Basin Plan update. And I think this also captures the ethic that we're all striving for, which the many uses of water in the Rio Grande Basin. And so we're trying to communicate to people and trying to show people that a reservoir provides a flat water fishery, and then when an irrigator calls for water, that also provides fishery and aquatic improvements in the stream, but then a robust recreation economy. And then irrigating wet meadows provides habitat, but also return flows that then come back and are the water supply for our cities and towns and help us meet our compact obligations. And so I leave you with this, just to emphasize that we're all in this together, we're all we've got, and so I hope everybody continues to do their part and we can have a better future. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks. Time for a few questions. Recording this, so we'd like to have you use the mic.
I hope it's not too hard. The loss of your wetlands, what do you attribute that to?
A lot of our wetlands are tied to groundwater, and so where we've seen incredible declines in our aquifers, it's a lot of it. And so we've seen reduced river flows just in the last 2 decades. We're seeing 17 to 20% less water on average in the Rio Grande. And so wetlands that are supported by surface diversions are decreasing, and then groundwater connected wetlands have also suffered as our aquifers have dropped.
Is that due to climate change or over like extra use of groundwater supplies?
It's both. And so a lot of people used to rely on their groundwater almost as a supplemental supply. They would irrigate with surface water and then use the groundwater at the end of the season. Now we're with the less flows in the river and less reliability, people are relying more on groundwater, and so it's coupled.
So I was on the Fort Collins Water Board for 10 years, and we did not get our Halligan expansion permitted in that time. And the cost for 8,000 acre feet has gone up to $170 million, I believe. So I'm struck by the size of your reservoirs and the benefits that you're getting, and the power of owning a little bit of storage, and the presentation yesterday about stream restoration, and maybe we're doing too much. You know, maybe let's let the streams be messy and let's do less, you know. And my point is, we are spending a tremendous amount of money on permitting and all those kinds of things. Could you just comment on how to use your reservoirs simply in this world that we have? And does it come down to partnerships, or what is the key?
I think it comes down to partnerships, and I think it comes down to taking the time to truly understand each other. You know, I think if I would have just bulldozed into CPW and been like, give me space, I'll give you nothing, we wouldn't have done anything. But I understand what CPW values, and they understand where our district is coming from and what we need, and that took a lot of time and trust. And so I think I appreciate you bringing this full circle and thinking through, you know, how do we get a big bang for our buck? And it's kind of amazing what just getting lunch with people and becoming more aware of. I think that's something that I personally strive to do, is to really understand the different entities in the San Luis Valley and who's doing what. And then that also facilitates opportunities for partnerships. And so it's kind of a low tech, low cost, high reward endeavor.
Thank you for this. It's really important to me because I live there. But I think one thing that really works in the valley with all the wetlands is the farming, because that major flyway for that also provides the grain that the sandhill cranes need, and not just the sandhills, but it's everything all the way. So when the river falls, the wetlands go down. And so it's critically important that we keep them. It is a major flyway.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask, I was pretty impressed by that you re-emphasized the pre-compact resources.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other pre-compact resources that also might think about being utilized in the future to make the most of them?
Yeah, definitely. So Rio Grande Reservoir it's our biggest, well, I guess it's our second biggest reservoir. It is also pre-compact. It's 54,000 acre feet. And so yeah, the comment that Steve made about we're doing a lot with these little reservoirs. There's some bigger ones. Santa Maria and Continental are both over 20,000 acre feet. And those water users are also looking for ways to improve. And we're thinking about, as the Conservancy District, how can we use our water in those buckets as well? And so, absolutely, I think it's just the more time we put towards it, we'll figure it out.
Well, it's great to hear that. If nothing
Yeah.
else, just to stay out of the black hole of the Elephant Butte thing, right? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. That's why I was careful, Heather. Don't go too far down this rabbit hole. Like, these people didn't come to hear about the compact, but.
Okay, any last questions? Yes.
I really appreciated hearing about your district's use of your augmentation water for a variety of benefits. Do you have additional plans for that, or could you speak to just the augmentation as a tool for meeting a diverse set of needs in addition to augmentation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the answer is yes. And so Robert in the back knows that I get all teary talking about some of the wins that we've had, because it is pretty special to get to be, we're in a small community, and so that means we know who to call, which is really special. And so we were actually able to work together. Quickly tell this story that the City of Alamosa puts on an adventure race in June, and they timed it as well as they could. They had it the second week of June, and the Rio Grande usually peaks on June 8th. So by all accounts, they picked a good time, but this year the river peaked on May 8th. And so we were all watching the daily sheet. We get an email from our water commissioners every day that says how much water is at all the gauges and who's in priority. And so the week before the race, things just plummeted, and there was a group of us that was like, if we don't take action, there are going to be a lot of people who show up in their running clothes with nothing to paddle in. And I should say the adventure race is a run, bike, paddle, and it was wildly successful last year and super fun, and so we wanted to make sure people had that opportunity. And so building off of these friendships, I called Tony with CPW and said, hey, if we can get water to Alamosa, will you float it? And he's like, yeah, I'll kick out some beaver native for carriage. And I was like, all right, we can do this much augmentation. BLM totally changed their summer plans and took their augmentation water for the wetlands a month earlier than they had planned. They said, oh yeah, we'll use other water. Sue was like, I had a whole schedule, but there's no reason I can't adjust it. And DWR gave us the sideboards. The Conneaus Water Conservancy District took water and did an exchange to another reservoir. And we were able to get the flows from, I think it was 90 CFS to, was it 250, Emma? Or almost to 200. And so it wasn't a lot of water, but it was a big deal for our small community. And so yeah, I think it's just about how can we continue to understand each other's needs? How can the recreation community show up and tell us, when flows are helpful? Because if we've got the water, I'm always willing to try to make it go further, but I just don't understand what everyone's up to. And so I think that's part of it.
Wow, this is a positive wave to go into lunch, huh? People are coming together. Take advantage of this conference. I go to a lot of conferences. You usually don't have access to speakers and people who know a lot like this, so please follow up the people you've heard from this morning or throughout the conference and take advantage of that. It's really a great opportunity. So let's thank all of our speakers once again.